everybody, and welcome to Mothermind, a place where we're going to find answers to all our mental health questions. I believe that finding the perfect balance for your mental health is possible, and to help us with that, to help us achieve that, I have with me today a great resource, Dr. Christy McElroy. She's a specialist in eating disorder, and this is a very interesting but a very intricate subject. She has about 10 years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So today we wanted to talk about, to get an idea of what is eating disorder from the beginning to the end, including treatment as well. So, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so I think the first question I have for you is based on personal experience. I had a couple clients actually mentioned I never thought I had an eating disorder because I didn't fit into a particular thing. I looked for it in Google, and what Google says that eating disorder is, I don't think I have that, and I don't look like that. So what can you tell us, and what can you say about those patients?
That's really an excellent question too, because a lot of people kind of, when we think of eating disorders, we think of what does a stereotypical eating disorder look like, that there's a specific appearance for eating disorders and something, what is the typical eating disorder? And actually, the reverse is true. Most people who have eating disorders have an atypical presentation, and it doesn't look like they have an eating disorder. So who has an eating disorder, there really isn't a specific description.
That is so important that you say that, because I think that one of the most important things to get healthy in regarding to eating disorder is first identifying it. And it's so hard to get, especially a teenager, to say, yes, I may have an eating disorder, and identify with it. Why do you think it's so hard for them to identify with an eating disorder? Is it the myth behind it? Is it the mysticism of what people actually look like? Because there's pictures. This is an eating disorder. See what I mean?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. I think that's a big part of it, that eating disorders, we're supposed to look a certain way to have an eating disorder. And actuality, in my own experience in treating clients with eating disorders, you can have people experiencing or suffering from anorexia on all ends of the weight spectrum, so it really doesn't even matter what weight they're at. But so that's one part of it. I don't fit that stereotypical eating disorder presentation. The other part of it is that as someone progresses in that disorder, their thinking does become more impaired because there is malnourishment, and they start experiencing cognitive impairment, and you don't realize it because it's so gradual. And it's very common for someone suffering from an eating disorder to look at other people who have eating disorders and say, well, they have it way worse than I do.
So how can you, let's say, to demystify everything that's out there, how would you tell our audience what an eating disorder is, for them to not just read about it, but to get a sense of what it really means to have an eating disorder?
What it means to have an eating disorder is having an unhealthy relationship with food, and using eating food as a compensatory behavior. So it's kind of like a coping skill. So usually when someone has an eating disorder, there are like prior issues that occur first.
I know what you mean. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, do you know what word I'm looking?
No, I can't find the word for it, but I think what you're trying to say is that the eating disorder doesn't just happen. It's something that's gradually growing into an eating disorder because of things that had happened to that person before.
Yes. So yes, most people don't wake up in the morning and say, I think I'll have an eating disorder. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
No, typically, it takes years for them to develop. And so it's not unusual for someone to have a history of anxiety, depression, OCD, trauma, something like that. And as that builds, things become more dysfunctional. And then add on top of there's genetic factors. There's also family dynamics. All of those things kind of come into play here. And so when someone's world becomes more and more out of control or feels more out of control, we look for ways to cope with it. And so what happens then is food becomes that coping skill, and it also becomes a distraction, and it also becomes a way for that person to numb themselves. So it's many things that kind of food can act as for that person.
So let me see if I understand, or if I can summarize it in a good way. Eating disorder is just not something somebody just wakes up with. Right? It's not something that spontaneously happens.
It develops over time.
It has to do a lot with anxiety. It could also have to do with depression, with trauma. And it is a way of coping or managing the anxiety, the trauma, the depression. And some people do it through food. And their relationship to food becomes a negative relationship with food. Whether it is that you stop eating, right? Which is associated with anorexia.
Yes.
Or when people become so immersed into food that food becomes calming to them.
Yes.
And then they feel so guilty that they purge.
Yes.
Okay, so that would be a good.
Or they binge on food.
Or they binge on food as well.
And those behaviors actually create like almost a numbing effect, almost like a sense of euphoria for that person. Like purging could be euphoric. Sometimes people can purge in different ways too, like through exercise. That could be their form of purging. But in the end, you bring up a good point though. Typically the restriction is associated with anorexia, purging is associated with bulimia and so on. But eating disorders as a whole, really, those behaviors can shift. So it's not necessarily even about a specific diagnosis, because over time, that person can experience all of those behaviors.
That's very interesting.
And so maybe at one time they can meet clinical criteria for anorexia, but if they continue to struggle, they can also eventually meet criteria for bulimia. Or binge eating. And so sometimes it morphs into something different. And so I personally don't like to place too much emphasis on the diagnosis other than eating disorder, because they do tend to shift.
Okay, so another thing that you mentioned that was very interesting was the anxiety part of eating disorder, because that is related to your mood and it's related to how you interact with the world so heavily. Now, kids or teenagers that have eating disorder, they also have anxiety, or they can have OCD, for example.
Or trauma.
Now, the treatment for an eating disorder seems to be very invasive.
It is. It's very complex.
And threatening, and it's so complex.
Scary. Yeah.
So you have a multidisciplinary team, which that means you have a doctor, you have a nutritionist, you have a psychologist, you have a social worker. You have so many people working, and the systems in place for this could be even hospitalization. They could go for a week to a place that is not their home. So I can imagine how stressed out a kid. First of all, his mom or her mom takes him to get evaluated, and they say, yes, you have an eating disorder and we recommend hospitalization. Panic mode.
Yeah.
So how can we talk to the parents and to the teenagers and to the people that are going through this, so this invasive process that is treatment could be seen in a different way?
Yeah, it's a really complicated road to recovery, and on average, it takes about 2 to 7 years to recover from an eating disorder. And it doesn't mean that person is going to, be experiencing behaviors for that amount of time, but it takes years to develop one, and so it takes quite some time to have a healthier relationship with food and have a healthier relationship with your body. But eating disorders, like I said, are complicated, and so it's important to note that eating disorders have the highest mortality rate and they have the highest death rate, and so we do need to take them very seriously, especially in our approach to treatment. And when you are being treated for an eating disorder, specifically, you have an entire treatment team for those reasons. The first one is we really do need to address the medical comorbidities that are associated with it. It's very common to have, malnutrition effects because of it. So potassium levels can drop. You could develop heart issues, and there's a whole host of symptoms that we need to monitor very closely on the medical side of it. And then obviously then there's the therapy part of it. Helping someone identify positive coping skills and work on, their relationship with food instead of resorting to using food to numb themselves or cope. What are some other healthier ways? And then after that, once that's more stable, being able to identify what are the underlying triggers that contribute to you resorting to those unhealthy behaviors. And then we have dietitians, which, dietitians are really a critical part of the treatment team for eating disorders. They also help that individual work on improving their relationship with food. And because in the end, eating disorders really aren't about food. It's about the relationship with food, but it's more than that.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry to interrupt, because kids have an idea that treatment for eating disorder is they're gonna make me eat.
Yeah.
That's all they're focused on. They're gonna make me eat. And if you don't talk to them and if you don't orient them the right way, that's what freaks them out the most. They need to know that you need to be in an environment where you're gonna be protected, where other things have to be taken into consideration that are needed for your health, and explaining all these things that you mentioned about the physical part of it is important for them to know as well. And that relationship with food needs to be healed, and you cannot heal a relationship in the same environment that you have been damaging that relationship.
Right.
So even being taken away from home as they might see it is part of them getting healthy. It's part of them realizing what is happening to me, to my mind.
And it goes beyond mental health. It really is whole body health. And that's what we're doing in eating disorder treatment. So that's why the dietitian is so important, because there does need to be improvement in their relationship with food. They need help with identifying their hunger cues again. When you go that long with when you go that long without with the restricting and just the variable diet, your hunger cues kind of get messed up, and so it's hard to know when you're actually hungry and when you're full and so on. And then the last piece of that is the psychiatrist. Sometimes, not everybody chooses to have medication, but sometimes medication can be helpful in the process too.
Yeah, to help with the other situations that you might be going through, like sadness, and intense worry. And medication might seem scary for most parents out there, but it's something that is going to help them out specifically in the beginning of things, to get things balanced, to get their cognition, their brain balanced out, so they can absorb the information they're getting a lot better. And I wanted to use this thing to bring in the parents. Parents that have children with eating disorder may feel so guilty and may have so many things, that they might think about. What did I do wrong? What happened? Who's been telling what to my kid? They have either this intense guilt or this intense locus of control, external, right? Who did this to my kid?
Who did this to you?
Who's
and this is why it happened.
Your friends, of course. The friends are always the mean ones. So what can we, and they're not the mean ones, by the way. What can we tell parents in this hard process? First of all, how do they identify it? When would be a good time to go get help? And what would be the best way to proceed? I think we had a conversation previous to this, and that's how this all got started. That you mentioned, the parents shouldn't become the eating police. I love that you said that, because then parents are over on top of the kid. You have to eat, you have to eat, you have to eat. And that creates more anxiety around food. So again, to kind of summarize, what would you advise parents to be aware of, and what would be the best way to proceed?
Well, that was the first part of it. Definitely, it is scary. And first of all, just doing the best you can, but not being the food police is critical. And I think most parents fall into that trap. Really, the more you try to control what your child eats, the further in the opposite direction they're going to go. You're really not helping the situation by being the food police at all.
Don't be food police.
That's the first part of it. And the second part is recognizing that it's not necessarily your job as a parent to fix the eating disorder. The very best thing you can do as parents is to be mom and dad, and provide support. That's really the best thing that you can do.
I think that is super good advice, and to any parent that's listening to us today, please have that in mind. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to the loved one that is going through eating disorder a situation, because it's very hard, and as we talked about it today, it's very dense, and it's not a quick fix.
No.
It's something that doesn't happen overnight, so therefore it won't be fixed overnight. Now, the good thing about this that I want everybody to remember is that there is wellness at the end of this journey. There can be re-encounter with yourself, a re-encounter with how you see food, and most importantly, to love yourself again. I think people that have anorexia or bulimia or any eating disorder, or any mental disorder for that, they fall out of love with themselves, and wellness is a path through finding love with yourself again. So thank you so much for doing this with me today. I appreciate it so very much. It was so nice. Any parting words, anything you want to leave our listeners with?
I think I want parents and loved ones and people who do struggle with eating issues, eating disorders. I think the most important thing that I like to relay is that recovery is 100% possible for everyone. No matter how difficult it seems, it is possible for everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Once again, this is Mothermind Psychology. We have a lot of subjects and a lot of topics coming up next. If there's anything that you guys want to hear about, please let me know in the comments. Para mis personas que hablan español, por favor, si quieren este tema o cualquier otro tema en español, déjenme saber y lo vamos a hacer, lo podemos hacer. Es cuestión de tener los contactos y tener la disposición para hacerlo. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back soon.
Are you still here? What are you still doing here? I'm really glad you liked the video. Be sure to subscribe, and don't forget to check out my blog, theselfconfidencechronicles.com, to get lots of other information on my channel. I hope you join me there. And go do some self-care. Go. Bye.